Hey, seventh grade, it's time to get back into Touching Spirit Bear. Today we're going to read chapters 22 and 23. So make sure you open up your books to page 185 where chapter 22 begins. Ready? Here we go. After Edmund left, Cole spent the rest of the afternoon carving. At one point, a downpour forced him to roll the log close to the cabin. He stretched a tarp out from the cabin wall so he could keep working. By nightfall, he had finished the eagle. Already he had decided to carve a wolf next. The next morning, after visiting the pond, he washed his clothes in the stream. He built a fire in the cabin's barrel stove, then hung the clothes across the room on a makeshift clothesline. If he hung his clothes outside, they would never dry. That afternoon, he tried to make himself invisible. He bathed extra well in the cold stream, then put on clean clothes. He even rubbed ashes and sweet cedar boughs over himself to mask any human smell. Then he hiked out to a point at the mouth of the bay where he could watch the shoreline both outside and inside the bay. He wedged himself down between two big rocks and sat totally still. For 2 long hours he waited, but saw nothing. Frustrated, he got up and moved into the trees to try hiding beneath the thick undergrowth. The shore came gradually alive with seals, seagulls, and eagles, but no bears. Finally, chilled to the bone, he returned to camp. Several more times before Edmund's next visit, Cole tried being invisible, but had no luck. One morning, a beaver swam around him as he sat in the pond. At first, all he could see was a V-shaped ripple on the surface of the big as let me try that one again. At first, all he could see was a V-shaped ripple on the surface of as the big animal swam closer and closer. Cole cleared his mind, breathed deeply, and sat completely still. The beaver swam even closer. Suddenly, Cole reached out and tried to grab it. The beaver exploded in the water, slapping its tail with a loud whack before disappearing. That was the only time the beaver ever came near. Cole regretted betraying the beaver's trust. He couldn't help but think how many thousands of times he had done the same thing to people. That night he danced the beaver dance. He realized that a beaver had persistence. That means you never give up, you keep trying no matter how hard something is. Patience and ingenuity. Ingenuity is when you're kind of creative. Maybe you take a problem and figure out a solution in a way nobody's ever thought of before. You create new ideas, you make the best of your surroundings and use those surroundings to help you out. By using only its front teeth to chew down one tree at a time and dragging each one into the water, it eventually made a home that could dam a whole river. The next day, Cole began carving a beaver's head. He tried to think about the lessons the beaver had to teach, but he grew frustrated by how poorly he carved. The beaver head looked more like a deformed frog. Still, he kept carving. The air warmed with the passing of spring and the coming of summer. Some days, not a cloud showed in the open blue sky, but most days were drizzly and wet. Cole had never seen a place with more rain. Back in Minneapolis, Cole had thought that being alone on an island would give him plenty of time to just sit around. But just the opposite was true. Each day he kept busy cooking, carving, soaking in the pond, fishing, carrying the ancestor rock, washing clothes, doing schoolwork, and cutting firewood. Cole prided himself on how sharp he kept his knife and hatchet. Many nights he sat on his bed, working them against a flat stone until they could shave paper. Cole also continued to explore and look for the spirit bear, but still the bear did not show itself. Each night, Cole tried without luck to find the feelings to dance the dance of anger. Weeks passed, but the large blank space he had reserved at the bottom of the totem for his anger carving remained empty. During one of Edwin's visits, Cole expressed his frustration. "I've tried to be invisible," he said. "I hide and try not to smell like a human. I've even smeared cedar boughs and ashes all over my body, but I still haven't seen a spirit bear again." "Maybe you're still not invisible," Edwin said, climbing into the skiff to leave. "Have you danced the dance of anger yet?" Cole shook his head. Edwin pulled the starter rope and brought the engine to life. He motioned for Cole to push him out from shore. Cole felt helpless as he watched the Tlingit elder disappear across the water. This time, he had stayed barely long enough to unload supplies. Didn't he care? Was he mad? Cole returned to camp and spent the rest of the day carving. As he carved, two questions haunted him. What was the one thing that would help him heal? And how could he become invisible? Those seem like tough questions. So let's wonder, what do you think? What do you think is going to help him heal? What do you think is going to help him become invisible? Many days, Cole still fought hard to escape his familiar rage. It kept reappearing for no reason he could understand. At those times, he concentrated on funny and happy things. No matter how hard he tried, however, he still couldn't bring himself to dance the dance of anger. Long, frustrated hours beside the fire brought angry movements, but the dance refused to come to him. One day, after carrying his ancestor rock up the hill, Cole rolled his anger away, then sat down to think. Why had the spirit bear come to him when he lay wounded? Why had the beaver and fish come so close to him in the pond? He hadn't been invisible at those times. And why hadn't the bear showed itself again? Cole puzzled so hard his head hurt, but there seemed no connection. Nothing made sense. Nothing made sense. I lost my spot. I lost my spot. I lost my spot. Nothing made sense. Finally, he headed back to camp and worked the rest of the day in a sullen mood. That night, he went to bed as usual, but in the early morning hours, he awoke with a start and jolted upright in bed. He knew how to be invisible. Chapter 23. To be invisible, he had to clear his mind. That was the secret. Cole stared up into the darkness. In the cold pond, his mind became almost trance-like. The fish and the beaver had come close until he thought of hurting them. The day he touched the spirit bear, he had been near death and had completely given up trying to be in control. Being invisible had nothing to do with being seen. Being invisible meant not being sensed or felt. This discovery excited Cole and set him to thinking. If animals existed in a world of instincts and senses beyond the conscious thoughts of the mind, what happened to people in their frantic worlds of noise and hectic thought and hectic rushings? How much of the world do people miss because they were not calm enough, empty enough to experience it? Cole's thoughts raced as he stared up at the black ceiling of the small cabin. He couldn't wait until morning. When dawn finally arrived, he hiked to the opening of the bay instead of going to the pond. He made no special preparation except to wear a heavy sweater and a rain slicker. The persistent drizzle and cold had become a daily part of his life here on the island. As he walked, he focused on the patterns around him. The lapping waves came as regularly as deep breaths. The light drizzle roughed the water's surface. Clouds hung low as fog, and thousands of smooth, worn rocks lined the timeless shoreline, like a ghost highway that disappeared into the mist. Cole felt a part of the patterns as he meandered along the shore. When he reached the point, He picked a natural saddle between two rocks and sat down. He focused his gaze on a small white rock near the water's edge and breathed in deeply. To see the spirit bear, he needed to clear his mind to become invisible, not to the world, but to himself. He left his hood down to let his head and senses remain exposed to the air. The cool drizzle soaked his hair, and soon droplets of water dripped off his forehead onto his cheeks. When he closed his eyes, the droplets felt warm on his face. At first, they felt like his own tears of anger and fear. Then he breathed more deeply, feeling the rhythm of the world around him, an endless rhythm where time disappeared. As the past, present, and future became one, the droplets on Cole's cheeks dripped to the ground, melting into the landscapes to which they belonged. When he opened his eyes once again, it was as if he were waking from a deep sleep. Far down the shoreline, where the rocks disappeared into the folding mist, a white object had appeared. At the place where things visible faded into not being there, stood the spirit bear, as clear as if it were standing only feet away. The bear gazed patiently. As Cole stared back with the same patience, all time, even the present, ceased to exist. He no longer thought of himself as Cole Matthews, a juvenile delinquent from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Instead, he was part of the landscape without a beginning or end. Rain dripped off the rocks and lined the shore that same way it dripped from his forehead and flowed down across his cheeks and lips. It blurred his vision, and he blinked. The spirit bear had disappeared. Because Cole and the bear belonged to the same landscape now, Cole still felt the bear inside. He closed his eyes, still remembering. When Cole next opened his eyes, he had no idea how much time had passed. He crawled stiffly to his feet and picked his way back along the shoreline toward camp. That night, Cole built a bigger than usual outdoor fire. He cooked a supper ceremoniously. With delicate pinches, he added spices to the boiling water. Then carefully he broke in spaghetti noodles. He heated sauce, stirring with deliberate strokes. When he ate, he savored every bite, as if it were the last he would ever eat. When Cole finished eating, he washed dishes and carefully folded a towel, which she had used as a tablecloth. Edwin had said that every day and every meal was to be savored, but tonight was extra special in Cole's mind. Today he had discovered how to be invisible, and he was ready for the dance of anger. Carefully, he stoked the fire once more and sat down to wait for both the flames and his feelings to come alive. When the fire blazed high, Cole stood. Suddenly, a frightening scream escaped his throat. As the sound melted away down the shoreline and into the trees, he began to dance. Spinning and weaving, he crossed the clearing to a solitary tree near the cabin. The tree was a tall cedar with only sparse scrub branches down low. Cole crouched before the solid trunk and doubled his fists menacingly. The tree defied him. That was why he had attacked the spirit bear. Its proud existence challenged him. "Get out of my way," Cole ordered, swinging his fists as if to hit the tree. Again and again he warned the tree to move out of his way. When it remained, he hung forward, swinging his fists within inches of the trunk. "Get out of my way," he shouted. "I'm warning you." When still the tree didn't move, Cole grabbed at the lower branches, all the while cursing and muttering angry threats. The branches broke. Cole continued his dance. He spun and lunged at imaginary enemies in the dark, yelling at the rocks and the sky and at the water. "Get away! Don't mess with me!" Already his dance had lasted longer than any of his dances in the past, but Cole was far from done. The whole world was challenging him, and the dance grew more violent. Cursing wildly, he turned back to the flames and gave the burning chunks of wood a hard kick. Flames and hot ashes exploded into the dark. He kicked again and again, and soon the camp was a bed of glowing embers. Cole stalked among the smoldering ashes, grunting with effort and rage. He pretended to throw his spear, then fell to the ground and clutched his hip and arm. He grimaced as he relived the bear attack and the hatred he had once felt for the spirit bear. Twisting on the ground, he relived the pain, the cold, and the loneliness. He continued his dance on the ground. As he writhed slowly at his back, near the coals, his heart pounded, a steady beat like a distant drum. He felt the storm that had killed the sparrows. He saw again the jagged white flash of lightning and heard again the crash of the huge tree that almost ended his life. Still, Cole continued. Standing, he walked to the shoreline and picking up a big rock. The rock became his ancestor rock, and he walked in circles. Then, with an exaggerated motion, he heaved the rock into the water. When waves from the splash reached shore, he called into the darkness. "I'm sorry," he screamed louder. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt Peter." The only answer Cole heard was the breeze pushing through the treetops. Tears came to Cole's eyes and flowed down his cheeks. For several minutes, he let the tears flow, but he knew the dance must continue. Moving back to the fire, he spun among the dying embers on the ground, with a graceful motion gently kicking the larger coals back together. One by one, he returned the scattered chunks to the fire pit, each piece becoming a part of his dance and a part of his healing. The mound of embers and charred wood glowed brighter until a single solitary flame licked up, followed soon by another. Cole hugged his arms tightly to his chest and kept dancing. By the time the fire burned brightly again, sweat beaded his forehead and rolled down his cheeks with his tears. He was powerless to stop crying. His tears continued as if from some huge, bottomless lake. Now Cole had danced half the night, but still a defiant flicker of anger remained inside of him. He wanted to throw up that anger like bad food and be rid of it forever. He turned to face the tree he had threatened earlier. Again, he lunged toward the tree, only this time he let his fists strike the trunk. With each lunge, he struck the tree harder, ignoring the pain. Fists swollen and bleeding, Cole stopped suddenly. He caught his breath, feeling an overwhelming shame. In the middle of the night, he sank to his knees at the base of the tall cedar, his body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he whispered. At that moment, words he had never been able to speak before welled up inside of him. "I forgive you," he cried. "I forgive you." Then, his energy totally spent, Cole collapsed to the ground. Now his dance was over. The glowing embers cast faint shadows into the surrounding night under the trees. A large set of eyes reflected the light, staring patiently out of the darkness. That's the end of chapter 23. When he said, "I forgive you," who do you think he was talking to? Who was he referring to? Do you think his dad? Do you think his mom? Do you think Peter? Do you think Cole forgives himself? Yes. When he says, "I forgive you," he's forgiving himself. Okay, so now that chapter 23 is over, you need to go back to the packet that was sent to you when we started this chunk of text a couple days ago. You need to make sure that you complete the packet and submit it to me today by 8 o'clock. If you have questions, please stop in with Zoom or email me. Bye all.